Well, actually, what they've shared with us points to just the opposite. You had, for example, a letter from Christopher Dunham, acting assistant director in March of this year, where the FBI acknowledged that it has not observed an uptick of threats directed at school officials since it began tracking the data. Does that sound accurate to you?
Yes, sir.
And is it also true that, according to the FBI itself, none of the school board-related investigations have resulted in federal arrests or charges?
I think that's correct. I think of the 25, and for context, that's 25 tips.
I'm sorry, I have limited time, so yeah, that's correct. I'd like to move on. This committee's investigation concluded that the Justice Department's own documents demonstrate that there was no compelling nationwide law enforcement justification for the Attorney General's directive. Do you have any reason to dispute that conclusion?
No.
So we had an investigation of parents. We had a sweeping mobilization of federal power against the most protected core First Amendment activity, the right of citizens to speak and petition their government on the most important of issues, the education of their children. And you are telling me that the entire basis for that, there was no evidence to support it.
Well, I want to be clear. We, the FBI, as I said, were not and did not investigate people for exercising.
Should Attorney General Garland rescind the memo?
I'm sorry?
Should Attorney General Garland rescind that memo?
Oh, that's a question for the Attorney General.
Do you believe he should?
Again, that's a question for the Attorney General.
Do you believe that the Attorney General should apologize to parents who are the subject of that memorandum?
I'm not going to speak to that.
Will you apologize for the FBI's own role?
I think the FBI conducted itself the way it should here, which is that we've continued to follow our longstanding rules and have not changed anything in response to that memo.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your service to the country. I do want to focus on some areas of concern around American civil liberties that I have had long-standing concerns about. In testimony to Senate Intelligence in March, you stated that the FBI had previously purchased commercial database information that includes location data derived from internet advertising, but that to your knowledge, the FBI does not currently purchase data. But just last month, the ODNI declassified a report revealing that the FBI and other agencies do purchase significant amounts of commercially available information about Americans from data brokers. And the report notes that commercially available information, quote, has increasingly important risks and implications for U.S. persons' privacy and civil liberties, as commercially available information can reveal sensitive and intimate information about individuals. It is public information that the FBI uses Babel Street and Ventel and has a Lexus account. All of these companies provide data for purchase. Can you tell me how the FBI uses that data?
Respectfully, this is a topic that gets very involved to explain, and so what I would prefer to do is have our subject matter experts come back up and brief you, and they can answer your questions in detail about it, because there's a lot of confusion that can be unintentionally caused about this topic.
But does the FBI purchase data?
My testimony that you referred to before remains the same. And the story about the ODNI report doesn't change that. But again, there's a lot of precision and technical dimensions to this.
Well, I do appreciate that, but I'm looking at a report that is from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence saying that the FBI purchases data. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record.
Objection.
Do you know if the contracts with data brokers, like the ones I described, provide location data?
My testimony about purchasing commercial database information that includes location data derived from internet advertising remains the same, which is that we currently do not do that.
But the information that you have that has already been purchased, does it contain location information?
Again, I'm not trying to be obtuse or difficult here. I just know from experience that the more you drill into this whole issue of commercial data, geolocation data, et cetera, that it gets very involved. In some cases, it involves pilot projects that are in the past. In some cases, it involves national
Director Wray,
security information, et
I
cetera.
do
And so I just
understand
want to
that,
make
but
sure
you're-
that we get you the information
Okay,
you need.
that's great. I will take that,
in a
but I do
different
want
way.
to say that this is just an extremely important issue for the American people to understand how their data is being used. That is location data, that is biometric information, it's medical and mental health information, it's information related to individuals' communications, it's information about people's internet activity. And while I understand that that's complicated, that is the reason that you come before us, so that the American people can hear this. Let me ask you this. Does the FBI have a written policy outlining how it can purchase and use commercially available information?
There are a number of policies that bear on this topic. Again, that could be part of the same briefing that we're happy to provide. I don't dispute at all that this is an important topic. I'm simply saying that precisely because it's such an important topic, that a minute and 12 seconds counting down is not the
No,
best way for me to
I understand that,
explain it, that's all.
but I'm asking whether there is a policy. It sounds like there is a policy. When was that policy last updated?
That I can't, as I sit here right now, I don't have the answer for you on that. But again, there are a number of policies that are relevant to this, and so that may affect the.
And you'll commit to providing those to us so that we can explore them too.
I would commit to providing you a briefing that will provide hopefully very helpful information to help you understand better this whole topic.
What about a written policy governing how commercially available information can be used in criminal investigations?
I think it's all wrapped up in the same answer I just gave.
I mean, the reason that this is so important is because the question is whether the FBI uses that data to generate leads for investigations only or further along in the investigative process. There's public reporting on DHS contracts with the same data brokers that I mentioned earlier, totaling millions of taxpayer dollars. And as you know, in the 2018 Supreme Court decision in Carpenter versus the United States, the court held that it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment for the government to access historical location data without a warrant. Does the FBI have a written policy interpreting the Supreme Court's decision in Carpenter?
If I recall correctly, there was guidance, I can't remember if it's a policy or what, that came out after the Carpenter decision. But again, I think that'll be encompassed in the briefing that we're talking
Well,
about.
I'm going to follow up with you. I want to thank you again for your service. This is a critically important issue for the American people to understand. We have bipartisan support around FISA reauthorization and the concerns we have around FISA reauthorization. And unless we really understand what measures the FBI is taking to ensure that people's privacy is protected, I think it's going to be a very difficult reauthorization process. I'm sure you know that. Thank you, Director Wray. I yield back.
Gentlelady is back, and I would just say well said. Appreciate your work with colleagues, bipartisan area and bipartisan approach in this area, and you have friends over here who want to help you on that. We now go to the gentleman from, I know, Director Wray, if we can go just a couple more, then we'll take a little break, if that works for the director. A couple more on each side, then we can take a break. Okay. I think. Okay. All right, we'll go. I think it's Mr. Morris is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Wray, thank you for being here today. In 2022, you testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee and stated, quote, "I condemn in the strongest possible terms any prospect of retaliation against whistleblowers," end quote. Do you still agree with that statement?
Yes.
Do you feel that your actions as the FBI leadership during your tenure live up to that sentiment?
Yes.
Director Wray, a few months ago, we heard from, are you familiar with a Special Agent Garrett O'Boyle?
I'm familiar with the name.
After Mr. O'Boyle came to Congress and blew the whistle on the misconduct at the Bureau, his clearance was unsurprisingly suspended. Did that surprise you? Do you find that suspicious?
I can't discuss a specific security clearance matter, partly because the security clearance determinations are made by ODNI, directed by the security clearance manager, which is not the FBI director. And I don't want to insert myself into the process while appeals are pending, for example.
Well, as a leader, I think it's important. We need to have the opportunity, and you know by law that they have the opportunity to be whistleblowers and talk to Congress and inform us on issues. And I think to restore trust in the FBI, it's imperative on you to allow whistleblowers to come forward. And for us to have the oversight we need to have to make sure, I mean, we're seeing the FBI is tanking, and it's under your watch, sir. And it concerns me for the American people. When I'm in the district, the number one concern, and I come from a fairly rural district, is weaponization of the FBI and the DOJ coming after conservative American citizens who just simply want to have a voice in the process. And so I would encourage you, Mr. O'Boyle, I understand he has been suspended since September of 23, almost 10 months now, 2022. He was suspended in 2022. So almost a year now, the man's trying to go without a paycheck. I don't know, could you make it 10 months without a paycheck, Mr. Ray?
I prefer not
According
to.
to what, yeah, well, you're talking about your wife not being real happy, but yeah, taking a pay cut. Well, can you imagine 10 months later, and you're still going through a process for just a whistleblower coming to the Congress and trying to inform us on issues he sees within the FBI? I think we could help you in the process if you would allow us. But in some ways, we have to look at this whistleblower and other whistleblowers and encourage them to come forward and be truthful with the American people. Two real quick questions. Why would the FBI offer Christopher Steele $1 million to verify a dossier about Trump-Russian collusion, and then the same FBI offer $3 million to Twitter to squash a story on the Hunter Biden laptop? Do you have any idea why a law enforcement agency would be playing into elections?
Well, you raised a number of different issues there. So first, as to the Steele dossier, that, of course, is a subject treated at great length in the Durham report, which and again, predates my time as director.
I understand that, but it was the same agency paying $1 million to push one story out or try to collaborate one story, and $3 million to quiet another story for political opponents. I don't quite understand.
And then I would, as to the second part related to Twitter, I would disagree with your characterization respectfully. When there are payments to social media companies, that is by longstanding federal law going back, I think, about 4 decades, where we have to pay companies for their costs in responding to legal process. And it's not just social media companies, it's other kinds of businesses as well.
Well, when those stories get out, and you understand, and certainly the dossier story, and I know that wasn't under your watch, but also the Hunter Biden laptop story, that, to me, looks political. To the American people, it looks political. And I'm just an everyday guy. I'm not an attorney, Mr. Ray. Just an everyday guy. But to me, it looks extremely political, and that is why you're having trouble keeping the FBI's reputation afloat. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield the balance of my time, but I want to enter one thing to the record, Mr. Chairman.
Can you do that after we just yield, then we'll enter in the record after?
Sure.
Director Ray, did the FBI ask financial institutions to turn over their customers? Yield the time to me. Did the FBI ask financial institutions to turn over their customers' debit and credit card purchase history in the Washington, D.C. area for January 5th and 6th, 2021?
I don't know the answer to that as I sit here right now.
Well, we do, because Bank of America gave us this email from the FBI to Bank of America.
Well, I am aware that Bank of America provided information to the FBI, but what communications occurred between the FBI and Bank of America about it?
Let's read it. To recap our morning call, we are prepared to action the following threshold. Customers transacting debit card, credit card, Washington, D.C. purchases between 1/5/21, 1/6/21. That's scary enough. But then the next bullet point's even more scary. Any historical, capital letters, all capitals, any historical purchase of a firearm. You guys asked financial institutions, at least Bank of America, we think more. Did you guys ask them?
Again, I don't have the full sequence of the back and forth. You've got looks like you've got one email that I haven't seen before here. So I don't know that I have the full exchange that this.
Well, does this email trouble you as much as it does members of the Judiciary Committee? That the FBI is asking for every single, we had members of Congress here that week. First time they're getting sworn in as a new member of Congress, their family in town, and you're sweeping, and they may happen to be a customer of Bank of America, and you're sweeping up every debit and credit card purchase of their family who were in town that week because their husband or their dad or their mom is getting sworn as a new member of Congress. And then you're also saying, overlaying that information with, did this person buy a firearm?
And the question is?
I'm just nervous about that. Are you nervous about that?
As I think I've testified before, my understanding is that our engagement with Bank of America was fully lawful, but that we recalled the leads that were cut to field
Well, if it's
officers.
lawful, that was my next point. If it's lawful, why did you say we're not going to use these leads? That's what Mr. Jensen testified to when we deposed him, the director of the terrorism unit at the FBI. That's what he testified to. Why did you not use the leads if it was lawful to get the information?
Well, there are
Chairman,
plenty
it's
of,
1 minute and 18 seconds overtime.
there are plenty of times where there are things that we lawfully can do, but that we decide it's better that we not do. And I think that's what happened.
The idea that Mr. Massey said earlier, that this is lawful, that you can ask this is scary. This is something else we're going to have to change. With that, I would yield to the recognize the gentlelady from, we got a unanimous consent request from Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the Wall Street Journal article I'd like to enter into the record says Republicans eye sweet home for new FBI headquarters in Alabama.
All right, without objection, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady for Texas for 5 minutes, and then we'll take a break, Director.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Director Wray, for your presence here. Thank you to the men and women of the FBI in particular for the work that you've done on gun violence and as well the work that you've done in keeping Americans safe. Let me very quickly move on some issues that have been made a chief part of the work of our friends on the other side of the aisle. Republican members of this committee have spent much time of this Congress claiming that various aspects of the U.S. government have been weaponized against the American people. Director Wray, are you or your staff or auxiliaries weaponizing the FBI against the American people?
Absolutely not.
Thank you very much. Let me thank you as well for your civil rights work and emphasize that in addition, there have been representations that the FBI exaggerates domestic terrorism reports or data. Certainly, January 6th had its many different storytellers, but that was an act of domestic terrorism. I don't know how you could have exaggerated that as evidenced by the special congressional committee we had. But let's just think of domestic terrorism as it relates to the good men and women of our law enforcement. Take an example in February 2020 in Texas, where a white supremacist was engaged in conspiracy involving swatting, a harassment tactic, and all of the emergency services showed up over and over again. Does domestic terrorism impact negatively and dangerously on America's law enforcement and first responders?
Absolutely, and sometimes law enforcement are themselves the intended victims or targets of domestic violent extremism.
Though you have good, committed individuals, does the critique is legitimate? That's our job. Does the constant condemnation impact on morale of FBI personnel or those trying to join the FBI?
Well, look, our people are human beings, and nobody likes to see the organization they've dedicated their careers, really their lives to, unfairly criticized. But I will tell you, as I said in my opening statement, that the good news is our people are also tough and resilient. Our attrition is in the low single digits and would be the envy of almost any employer, and our recruiting, unlike what's happening in law enforcement more generally, is actually up very significantly.
Thank you, and I look forward to it being diverse. Let me start with our whistleblower journey here. Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Serapin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name.
Yeah. The committee heard testimony that Mr. Serapin was suspended after he mishandled his service weapon and then said he wanted to use 2 female FBI executives as shooting targets. That was testimony of Jennifer Moore, HR under Human Resources under oath from the FBI. Mr. Serapin describes himself as a congressional whistleblower, but committee Republicans will not tell us whether he has been in contact with them. Are you familiar with former FBI agents Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen?
Again, I'm familiar with the names.
Thank you. O'Boyle was suspended for accessing information about an ongoing case and then leaking to the press, and Allen was suspended for interfering in the investigation of a January 6th suspect. Both Allen and O'Boyle testified before the Weaponization Committee in May. Were you aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
I think they are clearly there for all friends and family to see. I assume they wanted to be seen. Do you know who Kash Patel is, if you know?
Yes, I know who he is.
He's an aide to President Trump, isn't he? Or was an aide? Or is an aide to President Trump?
Well, he was an individual who served in a number of different roles, both up here on the Hill and in the executive branch.
Thank you. Here's another picture. It's the checks that Serapin sent to both O'Boyle and Allen. Each check was for $255,194. Let me say that again. These men were paid $255,194 after they testified as so-called whistleblowers. And it should be noted that it says here, as it says, for holding the line. Director, at the time that Serapin and Patel gave Garrett O'Boyle and Marcus Allen these checks, do you happen to know if they were still employees of the FBI?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer.
If they were, 5 CFR 2635, and I'd appreciate if we could get an answer in writing after you go back, whether they were or not, prohibits FBI employees from accepting cash gifts, doesn't it?
Well, there are a whole number of rules that would apply to this. Again, I don't want to weigh in on a specific person.
But if they were, that rule applies about cash gifts.
I'm not aware of a situation in which they could appropriately accept cash gifts.
Just generally, if
Oh.
if that applies to FBI agents about not taking cash gifts, is that correct?
There are definitely rules that apply to special agents
Thank you,
accepting cash gifts.
Let me just finish this. Can you explain why an FBI agent should not receive cash? But let me move to one that I think is extremely important. Mr. Chairman, just a moment. And here is what I think is most interesting piece of this whole puzzle. O'Boyle and Allen are represented by an outfit called Empower Oversight.
Time's
Empower
expired.
Oversight is run by former Republican staffers. Do you know who else Empower Oversight might represent
I
in
do
any
not.
way?
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request.
Let me just
Gentlelady's time
conclude.
expired.
Thank you so very much.
Respond.
Thank you. The so-called IRS whistleblower who Jim Jordan had relied upon. But does anyone need any further proof that these allegations are ginned up, corrupt political stunts advanced by those who don't want to see us follow the law? Finally, Mr. Chairman, here's another person who wants to join you on the 702, but the FBI has begun major reforms, and I think we should recognize that. You've been very kind. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. I would just point out, my guess is they got the money because they wanted the money because they had to they're trying to feed their family.
They actually haven't received the money. Have unanimous consent request, Mr. Chairman, of a tweet Matthew Foldy put out here during this hearing. Right off the bat, Jerry Nadler lies about whistleblower getting $250,000. He says here, Marcus Allen has not received $250,000. He has not received or cashed the check that Kyle Seraphin posted online. Enter that in the record.
Into the record, the committee will take a 5-minute recess, 5 minutes, then we'll come back.